What's some of the new knowledge that has come to light since the Snowy Mountain scheme was first conceived?
Well, I suppose the biggest change from a social and a almost an ideological point of view is the idea that the environment itself has rights. So when dividing up the water that's in a river system, you have different stakeholders. You might have irrigation, you might have hydropower, you might have just urban or urban use of water. But the idea that the environment itself is sort of a stakeholder at the table and that it deserves to have some water. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that people thought that any water water that flows to the sea is just a waste. You should keep it and use it.
Was that really a belief?
Oh yeah.
Has that been documented in any way?
I don't know where. I couldn't point you to references, but there was very much. I mean, this was perhaps in the big dam building era, but and particularly when in Australia, we have big droughts. We have this really variable climate, so. That any water that reaches the bottom of the system, it's like, well, that's a waste. You could use that for something productive upstream. But now we think of it very differently, and we say, oh, well, that's we see like the Murray-Darling system, and you see the Coorong where basically it's almost like the river was flowing backwards. The salt water was intruding up the mouth of the river, and we see that as a tragedy. We actually think about what happens at the bottom of the system and the top of the river system and realise that those activities are interconnected. And that's why I was talking about that connectedness before. And there is a lot of ecological theory as well that underpins those ideas and formalises them. So the idea that the river is a continuum from the headwaters, and what resources are put into the river, even just in terms of carbon and nutrients and energy, and that's transformed and reworked as it flows down the river.
I get that, the complexity of it. And you're using language that I imagine was unheard of in that day. The rights of other living things to the same resources that we use, fresh, clean water. I'm just wondering if there's going to be a language or a way of describing this in the future that sets nature, or sets us perhaps more in line with nature than the other way round, rather than anthropomorphising plants and animals. There might be a language developed to place us more as part of nature in the bigger realm. Like, we don't like to think of ourselves as animals, for example, and that our bodies are sustained by the same elements, fresh air, water, carbon, that sustain all the other living things. Do you think that might be a useful transition for us to make as a species, for us to start?
Well, I think that actually fits very well within ecology, as a science, and perhaps what puts ecology in contrast with a lot of other scientific disciplines where things are all very controlled and in the lab, and they're all very neat and tidy, and you can run experiments and they'll teach you a lot. But in ecology, even just trying to map one food web is almost impossible, and any ecologist who's actually worked in the field will know that. It's messy, it's crazy, and all the links between all the different forms of life out there are so complicated they would blow your brain. Like, it's beyond the human capacity almost for one person to really understand, or one mind to understand the complexity of the linkages that's going on out there. So I think definitely perhaps humans have an overwhelming influence on systems, but we are still part of that system. We're not outside of it. We're not some observer that sits around and sits on the edges and controls what's happening, and particularly, and again in the fields of river restoration, and you can have a concept of how a system works, but in trying to actually manipulate that, and that's what we do in my field as we were looking at making environmental releases, so trying to stimulate or trying to provide an artificial flood. Say for example in the snowy mountains you'd have a snowmelt that comes down every spring, which doesn't anymore because it's all trapped in the dam. So we were trying to recreate some element of those floods by releasing these huge flushes of water in the springtime. And what we're finding is that they don't behave they look like a flood, and they sound like a flood, but they don't always provide the same nutrients and energy that would come down in a natural flood, because it's stored dam water. It's crystal clear, it hasn't been washed through the catchment, it hasn't picked up everything along the way. So I think as humans we can try and recreate things that we see in nature, but you sort of realise how hard that is to do. You can't.
Because of the complexity.
Well, yeah, there's so much going on in there, and you realise this is actually, it's not just a matter of adding up these Lego blocks and suddenly you've recreated something that once happened. It's fundamentally very different to what nature does on its own.